Pentecost, as told by Luke in the book of Acts, suggests to me is that our differences should not be what divide us, but rather our differences are reflections of God's creativity and God's grace. This is especially relevant in these days when the Christian religion is too often perceived as a divisive, judgmental, and exclusionary movement. Nearly the opposite of the kingdom of peace, available to all, beginning with the least among us. How can some people interpret Jesus' message as exclusive, while others see it as the most radically inclusive message in human history? The Christian feast of Pentecost, the name Pentecost means 50th, is upon us. So here's a brief explanation of what it is. First, the word feast doesn't necessarily refer to eating. It refers to celebration. Just as we celebrate important events in our own lives, births, weddings, anniversaries, and yes, even death, as we celebrate the life of those who have gone from us. Just as we celebrate these moments in our personal lives, religious feasts commemorate certain significant events in our spiritual history, in our tradition. So the Christian feast of Pentecost has its roots in the Jewish feast of Shavuot, which means 50 days after Passover. So we celebrate Pentecost 50 days after Easter. We celebrate it always on this Sunday. So at the times of in the Hebrew world from which Jesus was born and into which he was born, at Shavuot, Jerusalem had been filled with Jewish pilgrims there, celebrating. And in today's reading from Acts, we hear about that. Jesus' disciples are gathered in a room, unsure of what to do next. The risen Christ has been with them for about 40 days. And on Ascension Day, which was 10 days ago, at that point, he ascends to heaven. So what were they to do without his presence and leadership? I wonder what they were thinking was their mission at that time. Were they going to go back to being fishermen and tax collectors? Or were they going to carry the message of Christ and the grace of Christ with them into the public sphere? Jesus had promised the advocate, which is the Spirit, that would come to be with them. So what did that mean? They had only the vaguest sense of what it meant. Frankly, they were hiding, as it suggests in this particular reading, from those who might persecute them. They were hiding from the Roman authorities. They were even hiding from the Jewish authorities who had been a part of the, shall we call it, conspiracy to kill Jesus. So they were deeply suspicious of others around them. Does any of that feel familiar to you now? Are any of us in a place where we are suspicious of others around us? So they were cowering in a room, afraid of just about everything. They poured into the public square on this occasion and began speaking the good news to everyone. Even more astonishing, after this event of the Holy Spirit descending upon them, people from many nations could each hear and understand in their own language. Peter stepped forward in today's reading from Acts into leadership, took his place before the crowd, and delivered a very we know for certain is that something extraordinary happened. Within 30 years, Christianity has spread to every major city in the Roman Empire. In a few more decades, it extended across the empire and way beyond. So what began as a minor Jewish sect had been transformed into the way of love, pioneered by Christ. So I suggest that that must be our thing here and now in this church, in all places of worship where people gather, where we are among the people that we live with. That to me is the heritage of Pentecost. Jesus once had a conversation with a group of people, religious leaders, at the home of a prominent Pharisee. And Jesus said, when you give a banquet, invite the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed. He told them a parable about a man who prepared a banquet and invited many guests. And when the guest list declined to attend, the man instructed his servant to go into the streets and alleyways in town and bring back the poor and the hungry. The servant obeyed, but he told his master, there's still room at the table. Then the master said, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come so that my house will be full. This is what God's kingdom is like. A bunch of outcasts, perhaps oddballs, gathered at a table, not because they are rich or worthy or good, but because they are hungry, because they said yes. And there's always room for more. The author, Sarah Miles, whose experience of Jesus with communion inspired her to devote herself entirely to a religion rooted in the most ordinary yet subversive practice, a dinner table where everyone is welcome, where even the despised and outcast are honored. And Sarah partnered with St. Gregory's Episcopal Church in San Francisco to create a massive food pantry. Sounds a little bit like us, doesn't it? And they served each week from the very table where Sarah took her first communion. No strings attached, no questions asked of the folks who came. There were hundreds that gathered around the table to fill their bags with fruit, vegetables, rice, cereal, the same things we serve in our food pantry. She writes in one of her memoirs, it seems counterintuitive to tell people they have to wait and meet Jesus someplace else before they meet him at the table. If people are hungry, she says, let them come and eat. If they are thirsty, let them come and drink. She says, it is not my table anyway. It's Christ's table. Christ sends out the invitations, and if he has to run through the streets, gathering up all of the riffraff to fill up his house, and that is exactly what he will do. At Pentecost, the Holy Spirit invites us to do the same. The gospel doesn't need a coalition devoted to keeping the wrong people out. It needs a family of sinners just like us, saved by grace, committed to tearing down the walls, throwing open the doors, and shouting, welcome. There's bread and wine. Come and eat with us and talk. You all know that I love Henry Nouwen. The author has written so many books, and a Dutch priest. In his book called Reaching Out, he says that the call to compassionate ministry is a great call, but we must not be fearful. We must not say, I can't do that, when we are aware that we are the beloved, and when we have friends around us with whom we live in community, we can do anything. We're not afraid anymore. We're not afraid to knock on the door while somebody is dying. We're not afraid to open a discussion with a person who, underneath all the glitter, is much in need of our ministry. We are free, and we can go wherever we are needed. My favorite Old Testament writer and theologian is a man named Walton. He died this past week at the age of 92. My favorite of his books is entitled Finally Comes the Poet. And in it he describes what a pastor and preacher should be for the people for which he cares. And he says, the task of preaching is to open the listener to the new futures that God is always sending. That tells me that God sends us all new futures. Sometimes we're stuck in the past and we can't see those new futures. So my job, my role, my call here with you is to talk about that new future for our parish. To get all of you involved in what our parish will be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now. How do we lay the groundwork for what all of our ministries will be? What talents are out there lingering unknown? If any of you are writers, speakers, if any of you have projects in your life that you want to share with us in our ministry here at St. Mary's, step forward, raise your hand, and say, I want to be a part of what we're doing here. I want to be a part of God's future for us. I don't want to merely stand up here and explain a text. That's an old school thing. You guys can read the text. You can interpret it for yourselves. I can help you with that. But I can't dictate, and I won't dictate what you think. But my role is to open a future for all of us here. A future not only for St. Mary's, but also a future for each of you individually. To open your spirit to what God is calling you to do. Imagine all these people at Pentecost being able to hear each other, even when they spoke different languages. What's that all about? You know, maybe just allegorical. We often don't know the history of the text, but what I read from this text today is that God is open to hearing all of our thoughts about what we want for ourselves and our own ministries in this parish. We want a God-shaped future. That's what Pentecost is about for me.